When I saw that report, I fully expected to see the individual who sexually abused me, and was shocked, and to my dismay, he wasn't included on the list.
It was 1987. Kurt was 14, a freshman at Jesuit high school in Sacramento. He wanted to be a swimmer.
I have this person who was very personable, engaging, and he had the black outfit with the white Roman collar.
When the swim coach, Brother Farrington, called him in for a fitting of his new Speedos, initially he went along.
So I looked around like, where, can I change? And he said, oh, it's okay, we're in high school now. We all change in front of each other just like the locker room.
He says he went on to change in front of Brother Farrington.
And I looked over and he was on his couch and he was leering at me, and he got up and came over and put his hands inside my Speedo front and back and sexually assaulted me. And so I at first froze like a deer in the headlights, followed immediately after with panic, and he immediately calmed me and said, it's okay, it's great, you're going to be a great swimmer, and gave me compliments. And then he calmly walked me back to class.
After the incident, Kurt told a teacher, something that not all victims do. The teacher reported it, and his parents were told that the person would never work around young people again.
When he was gone, I actually switched. I didn't go into swimming. I went into track and field, and I became a pole vaulter and kind of threw my passion towards that.
More than a decade after the abuse, and after he had moved on with his life, Kurt discovered that Brother Farrington did go back to working with young people.
In 2002, when the church scandal erupted, I Googled him, and this is 15 years later, mind you, and to my dismay and shock and outrage, I found out he's working at Loyola Marymount University. They never reported it to the civil authorities. No police report was filed or ever.
Brother Farrington's name didn't become public as an abuser until another victim from a different Jesuit school came forward with allegations, about a decade after Hoffman did.
And then in 2013, a man came forward and said, hey, when I was at Bellarmine High School, which is a Jesuit high school in San Jose, I was abused by Brother Farrington. And they said, we believe you. And that's because they knew about my case. And so that's when Farrington, for the first time ever, was exposed to the community as an abuser. Not just an abuser, but a serial abuser.
Kurt demanded and received an apology from the Jesuit province for the sexual abuse he suffered, and from Farrington himself, apologizing for the, quote, sad behavior I displayed at Jesuit some years ago. According to the Jesuit province, Brother Farrington now lives in a Jesuit retirement center in the Bay Area, where he's restricted and supervised under a safety plan where he has no contact with minors. But Kurt was once again disappointed recently when the Sacramento Diocese released the names of 46 clergymen credibly accused of sexual abuse and found that his alleged abuser was not on it.
And so they said, well, we only included priests and permanent deacons, but not brothers. So a Jesuit brother, Brother Farrington, who has the black outfit and the Roman collar, was not included. What's really important to me is that victims who are silently suffering out there, if they see that list and they don't see his name, they may feel like they're not going to be believed.
Joe George has represented multiple victims of sexual abuse by priests across California. He says the fact that a majority of the victims in the Sacramento list are attributed to only 3 priests is telling.
Medical evidence, psychological evidence is that pedophiles and other sexual criminals are recidivists.
George said the diocese has paid his clients alone about $50 million in settlements over the past 15 years. This week, the diocese announced a new fund for victims who come forward with abuse allegations to apply for, regardless of when the abuse happened.
Personally, I feel the reason the dioceses are releasing lists is damage control.
Joe Piscatelli heads the Northern California SNAP chapter, the survivors network of people abused by priests. He says the list of priests who have committed acts of abuse in Sacramento is longer than the one the diocese published. And to him, it's too little too late.
Had they had released the names or the information then, it may have enabled victims to come forward and either file claims for prosecution or civil claims. But since they enabled them and they kept a lot of this secret, the statute of limitations on most of these names has run out.
With the worst offenders having fled to Mexico or dead, and the statute of limitation having run out on so many of the others on the list, most of these priests went on to live normal lives.
We fail to protect you as children, and we fail to tell you the truth as adults. I am deeply sorry for these failures, and I am determined that these failures not be repeated.
In May, California Attorney General Javier Becerra's office announced an investigation into whether California's multiple dioceses have been complying with their mandated reporting on child abuse to law enforcement. The Sacramento Diocese was asked to voluntarily turn over the reporting documents. Tim Steer was a priest in Oakland for about 25 years. Now he spends his Sundays protesting in front of the cathedral, demanding reform.
Business as usual is not acceptable, and the church needs to do more for abuse survivors. Get past all of the apologies and really do something for them. Many of the ones I know have never been contacted by the church.
He stepped away from the church in part since learning about the church's handling of abuse accusations by one of his predecessors in Oakland, as well as out of disillusionment with the church's reluctance to reform. He shared some ideas about the systemic issues he sees within the church.
I would say the number one problem is just the nature of the church and the priesthood. In terms of the church, that it's very hierarchical, where the Pope is basically an absolute dictator. He has all authority, and any kind of questioning of traditions is not encouraged.
Why are there so many pedophile priests in the church? What is your observation?
Many feel like they're not really doing anything wrong. They feel they've made this sacrifice for God and that they're simply showing love to a minor, to a child. It's an expression of friendship. Some will justify it and say, well, if I don't have intercourse, then I'm not really crossing that line of celibacy. But it's very hard to get clergy to talk honestly about their sexuality, because even if guys aren't molesting kids, most of them are acting out, at least now and then. Some have partners, some have girlfriends, some have boyfriends.
Does it minimize the sin if everybody else is doing some of breaking their celibacy?
It certainly minimizes the transparency.
So if you don't tell my sins, I won't tell yours.
Yes, a lot of that.
The California legislature proposed a bill earlier this year that would force priests to report child sexual abuse revealed to them in confession. But Tim doubts the church will enforce that.
Priests lose touch with a sensitivity for children. Priests and bishops, they tend to automatically care more about the priest than about the victim. And often the victim is out of sight, remember, and they know the priest.
In terms of solutions, he sees ending the vow of celibacy as a top priority.
The whole celibacy thing is a setup for failure for priests. I have great compassion for priests, even the ones who molest kids who are sick, because they're in a system that is really unhealthy. Now, I'm not saying if a guy feels really called to celibacy and is voluntary, that's one thing, but don't make it mandatory.
Kurt Hoffman says having come forward with his story helped him deal with the trauma of abuse, and he hopes doing so will inspire the church to provide a more complete list and others to move forward.
The only thing that really matters is that victims who are suffering silently out there are able to have the courage to come forward and to talk about what happened and to find their voice, and that future potential victims don't ever get victimized.
In a statement this week, the Sacramento Diocese told ABC 10 the name of Mr. Hoffman's abuser was published by the Jesuits on December 7th and distributed widely. There are currently efforts underway to add his name to the Sacramento list. They added that nuns or brothers may be added later, staff or volunteers may be added at some point, but no decision has been made.